Hello friends, Winner's Edge welcomes you to UPHESC Advertisement number 51 English Literature paper preparation, and this presentation is about Johnson and Augustanism by F R Leavis. The Common Pursuit. This is a collection of essays in which Leavis's essays from his journal Scrutiny were collected and published. The title of the book comes from a passage in Eliot's The Functions of Criticism, where Eliot argues that critic must engage in the common pursuit of true judgment. For Lewis, this meant strenuous insistence on discriminatory criticism, clear statements about what is good and morally mature and admirable, and equally clear condemnation of what is trivial. Johnson and Augustanism was written in response to as a review of Samuel Johnson by Joseph Wood Crouch. Remember, this one has to be pronounced as Crouch. Lewis begins with, in this country, to those seriously interested in literature, the cult of Johnson is an exasperation and a challenge. Crouch is praised for his bringing together of all the sources in completely analyzing Johnson. He presented Johnson's Toryism, piety, and skepticism very well. Johnson had no bent towards hard authoritarianism or cynical realism. That's what Lewis puts here. And he was very much anti-slavery, and that everyone knows. This is the Johnson who could say, let the authority of the English government perish rather than be maintained by iniquity. Johnson was a great talker, writer, and Crouch doesn't recognize his greatness as a writer. For Johnson and his circle, conversation was an art and a game with rules and customs. Johnson's generalizing style is different from ordinary abstractions. Johnson was domineering and sociable and a great talker. For Johnson, of course, the supreme social activity was the art of conversation. Johnson and his circle talked epigrammatically and valued common sense. Common sense is the acceptance of certain current assumptions, traditions, and standards of value. Values that inform the linguistic and literary convention. Values which are never called in question, because to question any of them might be to necessitate a revision of government, society, and private conduct more thoroughgoing than anyone liked to contemplate. That any intelligent and well-educated gentleman, no matter what his special aptitude might be, was as competent as any other to settle questions, philosophical, theological, or even scientific, was what common sense meant. Most 18th century verse, and all Augustan verse, has a social movement, a movement that suggests company deportment, social gesture, and a code of manners. It's polite. Literary form is intimately associated with good form. Augustanism is not equal to superficialism, and the fourth book of Pope's The Dunciad is given as an example. Augustan verse sees reasonable as equivalent to moral, and it emphasizes the conventional and social conditioning of individual achievement. The Romantic poet is the enemy of the society, but that's not the case with the Augustan poet, and that's not the case with Johnson too, who is the voice of the society. The Augustan tradition had entered Johnson's intellectual constitution. It had shaped his work. Its effects are clearly seen in his verse, more than it is seen in his prose. Augustan tradition, as we have it in Johnson's verse, represents the strength of the 18th century in poetry. Gray is mentioned here, who had amalgamated two 18th century traditions of verse, the meditative Miltonic, specializing in molded ruins, ivy-mantled towers, and guaranteed poetical sentiment, with the Augustan. It is the Augustan part of Gray's verse that resonates in Johnson's verse too, and it is not that Johnson was influenced by Gray or imitated Gray. It was the Augustanism of Gray that is also found in Johnson's verse. The central Augustan feature in Gray's verse are the Augustan social gait and gesture, the Augustan prose strength which seeks the virtues of statement, the more juiced, the final phrase, and the neatness and precision that run to wit. Johnson appreciates Shakespeare the novelist, but he fails to appreciate Shakespeare the imaginative genius. The critic, who can in this way exalt the comedy above the tragedy, exhibits a failure in the appreciation of Shakespeare. His limitation in the face of Shakespearean tragedy goes with the limitation in the face of Shakespearean poetry. Johnson was trained in narrow Augustan code of reason, where every word in verse justified the reason for being there. In that tradition, there was no premium on the novelty of thought. That thought was often commonplace. The neoclassical rules and the unwritten codes had to be followed to put those ideas together and make the reader wonder at words never so well expressed. Johnson and his tradition have no use for the exploratory creative use of words. Johnson was representative in his inability to appreciate the more profoundly creative use of language. Johnson's method is that of the prose statement, and he is bound to moralistic fallacy and confusion. For him, a work of art must be explicitly and purposely moral. Shelley is taken to develop a contrast here. His genius is acknowledged. His language is as far removed from the prose like stating use of language as possible. While Johnson starts with an intellectual and moral purpose, Shelley starts with an emotional purpose. Shelley states his emotion, and Shakespeare develops them using his imagination and language. The contrast between the Cenci, Act 5, Scene 4, speech of Claudio, and that in Measure for Measure, Act 3, Scene 1, illustrates the point. Johnson discriminates with something approaching infallibility between what is strong and what is weak in the 18th century. He resists against Milton's words but recognizes the worth of Paradise Lost. Leavis singles out Pope's verses to the memory of an unfortunate lady and the fourth book of the Dunciad for praise of the Augustan tradition in him. He comments on its decline after Pope. He then points out the traits of a critic, the ability to be relevant in his judgments and commentaries, an understanding of the resources of language, an understanding of the nature of conventions and possibilities of organization, a specially developed sensibility. Finally, he concurs with Cruch's praise for Rosellas and points out that Austen loved it too. He concludes by referring to an English tradition that relates Johnson and Jane Austen to Crabbe. Well, I hope that you liked this video. If you have, please click on the like button below. You may want more. You may have topics in your mind that you want. Just put them in the comment box below and I'll definitely surely respond to them. Subscribe and you will get updated when I do. There is much more to come on this channel for UPHESC Advertisement 50 aspirants. This is the link of the channel where you are. My email address is here. You can mail me also. And you can check some basic information about UPHESC and Advertisement 51 and English literature on this blog of mine. So this is all in this presentation here. I hope you like it. I say again, so please like and subscribe. Thank you so very much.